The leader has said that he will respond to these remarks on the 10th of February, the day of the anniversary of the 1979 Islamic Revolution, to show what position the Iranian people assume vis-a-vis these threats. Earlier this month, Trump tweeted that Iran is playing with fire. They don't appreciate how kind President Obama was to them. Well, in this edition of the debate, we'll look at the different threats that Trump has made, Iran's position, and why Iran should be thankful to Obama for the creation of Daesh, something that obviously Iran has said that it places the blame on the United States.
Leader of Iran's Islamic Revolution, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, has made important remarks days after a fresh wave of threats and sanctions against Iran by the new U.S. administration. Ayatollah Khamenei referred to U.S. President Donald Trump's recent tweet in which he had said the Iranians should appreciate Barack Obama for his kindness towards them. Iran's leader said the nation doesn't hail the previous U.S. president, though it's grateful to the new one.
تشکر ما به خاطر این است که زحمت ما رو کم کرد. چهره واقعی آمریکا رو نشون داد. کاری که ما در طول 30 و چند سال هی میگفتیم فساد سیاسی، فساد اقتصادی، فساد اخلاقی، فساد اجتماعی در دستگاه حاکمه آمریکا رو ما میگفتیم، این آقا آمد در دوره انتخابات و بعد از انتخابات اینو علنی کرد.
According to the leader, what the new president is doing reveals false claims by the U.S. regarding human rights. Further in his speech, Ayatollah Khamenei said the Iranian people have no fear of the United States.
روز 22 بهمن مردم جواب این تهدیدها و این حرفها رو در خیابان خواهند داد. روز 22 بهمن نشان میدن که ملت ایران در مقابل تهدید چه موضعی میگیره. نه خیر، از تهدید کسی هم ما نمیترسیم.
The leader's comments come after the U.S. imposed new sanctions against a number of Iranian foreign entities and individuals last week. The sanctions were announced following a successful missile test by Tehran. In one of his tweets, President Trump also warned that Iran is playing with fire, and he will take a different approach from Obama, who, according to the new American president, was kind to Iran. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis called the Islamic Republic the world's biggest state sponsor of terrorism during his recent visit to Southeast Asia. In response to Trump's tweet, Ayatollah Khamenei said the former U.S. administration tried to unsuccessfully paralyze the Islamic Republic by imposing heavy sanctions on it. He added that apart from its anti-Iran policies, Obama helped create Daesh-Takfiri militants and set fire to Iraq and Syria. Ayatollah Khamenei further said Obama directly supported the post-election unrest in 2009 and described the former U.S. administration as hypocritical.
Our guest joining us for this edition of the debate from the Answer Coalition, Richard Becker, joins us from San Francisco. And the Executive Director of Americans New, Allison Weir, joins us from Berkeley. I'd like to welcome you both, and Richard Becker, I'll start with you. We're looking at some of the viewpoints that Iran's leader has had, and he has said that the real face of America was personified through the elections, through Trump, and of course, in reference to the mudslinging, he said that it showed the true face of the U.S. and what Iran has been saying for more than 30 years, basically revelations about U.S.'s political system, economic and moral and social corruption in the U.S., and personified mainly through Trump, but of course we saw what transpired during that U.S. election campaign. Has Trump damaged the U.S. standing and, in a sense, opened the window to the world as to how the U.S. Personifies itself, in this case through this character and personality of Donald Trump?
Well, I don't think that there's any question that just as millions and millions of people in the United States are appalled by the Trump presidency, by Trump being elevated to the office of president. He wasn't really elected in the sense of the popular vote, but he's been elevated there and now is in the midst of installing a very reactionary, warmongering billionaire grouping as his appointees in the cabinet. And I think that much of the world looks on with horror at what is taking place inside the United States. And Clinton, there were many people who thought before the election, and including some people who were involved in the anti-war movement in the United States, that Trump would be preferable to Clinton, to Hillary Clinton. We have no illusions about who Hillary Clinton is and who she was as Secretary of State. Her biggest project in many ways was really imposing crippling sanctions on the Iranian economy to the detriment of the people of Iran. But the idea that Trump was somehow going to be different or better or less warlike, less warmongering, I think that we see that that's completely untrue. And in fact, Trump is a highly unpredictable character who has access to, and it's his prerogative, has access to all kinds of weapons, including nuclear weapons. And the things that he's saying about Iran today and in the recent weeks are we have to sit up and take notice about this and be prepared to go into the streets to oppose any new war moves against Iran or against any other country in the world.
Well, Alison Weir, it seems like the tone that is coming from the U.S. through Trump and his administration is one that is very much confrontational. And it almost seems like if there was any headway that Barack Obama made, the former U.S. president, it's being rolled back. And some are saying it's been rolled back now to the Bush Jr. era, where we know how he dealt with Iran in terms of the rhetoric that was coming from him. Do you think that is the case?
Well, it's certainly appearing that way. Trump's statements are really extraordinarily bellicose and saber-rattling. He's obviously playing to his right-wing supporters, not all of whom actually support this, but the ones who are very vocal, that want more militarism from the United States. He's playing to the right wing of the Israel lobby in the United States, who also wants more action against Iran and other places that Israel considers a potential danger to Israel. So his statements are very unfortunate. I think, as everyone knows, they're not helping the matter. They're making it far worse. But I agree with the earlier colleague. His actions were extremely harmful. Bill Clinton's actions were harmful, as were George Bush's. Hillary Clinton was very predictable, and she would have been very much opposing Iran, making probably similar statements, maybe a little bit more subdued, but similar statements against Iran. So sadly, right now we have a situation where the current president is verbally escalating previous very bad policies. To what degree he'll act on that is really unclear, though, at this point.
Richard Becker, not to go too much in the past, but obviously one of the things that Iran is doing in terms of its officials is comparing, even though it might be still a little bit too early, but comparing the way that Trump is approaching now Iran to the way that Barack Obama did. And by some accounts, some may be under the impression that Barack Obama, well, he did fine when it came to Iran. But when you look at the bigger picture, when it came to the manufactured threat that was still continued under his administration, when you look at the wars that happened in the region and the fact that he supported, either directly or indirectly, these terrorists on the ground in Syria, of which it really threatened the region. Do you think that Obama is better than Trump in any sense, if you compare the two?
Well, it's hard to know what to, how we view better and worse in this circumstance. I mean, the Obama administration did not want to go to war with Iran. I think that Obama himself did not want to. I don't think the same thing about Clinton. And Clinton was the architect, really beginning in 2009, 2010, as Secretary of State, of the sanctions, extremely harsh sanctions. which did a lot of damage to the Iranian economy. And I think that the sanctions like that, and we've seen them imposed when they're imposed against Iraq or they're imposed on Cuba or Iran, should be viewed as acts of war. It should be redefined. International law should be redefined. And, you know, it's only certain countries that are eligible for sanctions in the present world configuration. And those are the countries that were former colonies. The countries of Asia and Africa and the Middle East and maybe Southeastern Europe can be included in that. But the United States, which went to war in Iraq, and I think as the statement by Ayatollah Khamenei correctly said, set the region on fire in a war, an invasion and occupation in 2003, which had no basis or could not be justified in any way. It was based on lies, it was based on false propaganda, and it tore Iraq apart, and it led to the tearing apart of Syria and to Libya as well, and to the rise of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But the United States is not threatened with sanctions because of its power in the world. It's not a matter of justness or right or wrong when it comes to things like this. It's power, pure and simple. And Obama presided over the U.S. empire, the most far-flung empire in history, and now Trump presides over it. And we should add that Trump's top advisor, top strategic advisor, Stephen Bannon, clearly wants another war, and he wants a big war. So we'll see if that can be restrained by others in the administration who know that a bigger war could lead to not only the defeat of one country or another, but has the possibility of leading to the destruction of humanity.
What makes you think that he wants another war? What indications have you gotten, Richard Becker?
Well, Bannon is very much influenced by a book called The Fourth Turn, and has spoken about it quite a bit, and he has pointed out in interviews that the fourth turn would be like every 80 years there's a big war, Revolutionary War in the United States, then the Civil War, and then another 80 years to the Great Depression and World War II, and that he is looking to another war that could be a world-changing war. And he said last August in an interview, does anyone believe that we will not be at war in the South China Sea in 5 to 10 years? I mean, that's a war against China and perhaps other countries, but that the clear implication of that would be that we would be talking about a nuclear war. So this is the person who is the closest advisor to Trump. I think we have to take that seriously.
So what difference does that have, Alison Weir, with what Obama was doing, because it was under his watch that the pivot to Asia occurred?
This has been going on for many years, for quite a few years. This kind of targeting of Iran was actually first being encouraged by Israel in about 1981. It's described in an excellent book by an Israeli writer, Israel Shahak, described about the Israeli strategy to prepare the Israeli public and the American public for a potential attack on Iran, dating from 1982. Then this was upgraded and conceptualized a little bit further in a paper in 1996. Iran was targeted again in 2001, along with about 5 or 6 other countries, and we see it again by Barack Obama. So this is a long-standing pattern. With Trump, there was one of the problems, and that's been written about quite a bit with the previous administrations, was the influence of people that are called neoconservatives. These were Israel partisans who were very militaristic and certainly believed in war. When they couldn't find real evidence for reasons to go to war, they would fabricate it. This has been written about quite a bit. The hope with Trump was that all of these neocons were endorsing, even though they're supposedly Republicans, they were endorsing Hillary Clinton for the presidency. There is a little bit of hope that Trump would keep them out, and therefore the militarism that they were pushing on behalf of Israel might be minimized at least a bit. But most recently, it looks like they're having increased influence in the Trump administration as well. It's very troubling that his deputy, I believe it is Deputy Secretary of State that's being floated, is a man named Elliot Abrams, who's an outright war criminal, was even found guilty of some crimes in the United States, and yet he's being talked about now as having a very influential position in the Trump administration. This is of great concern because, as Richard Becker mentioned, this kind of militarism and violence being perpetrated by the United States, certainly the blockade of Iran really does constitute an act of war. So these actions are leading to great suffering, cataclysmic suffering on some scales, could lead to outright wars, and certainly are extremely damaging to the whole world, including Americans. I'm not sure if enough people realize how extremely significant this is and how important it is that all Americans oppose it. Many are, but there need to be more of us out trying our best to stop this. And one thing I'd like to mention is, fortunately, the opposition, it's not large enough yet, but the opposition includes people from across the political spectrum. People like Pat Buchanan, who's a traditional conservative, is speaking out against this. Ron Paul spoke out against this. He's a libertarian, a conservative libertarian, who called the sanctions against Iraq an act of war. So there's some awareness of this in the United States and some activism against it, but so far, just not enough.
Okay, we're going to take a quick time out, listen to some of the viewer comments, and we'll come right back to the debate.
Washington should leave Iraq and Syria. People of these countries can decide their own fate. America should take good care of its own population. Even the incumbent US president acknowledges that Daesh is the creation of the country he's leading. They divide the Middle East and threaten those that don't go their way. That's the US modus operandi. I don't have doubts that Iran plans more terrorist attacks against America like 9/11. Everyone knows that Israel is the brain and US the muscle. The US has played only one role, causing devastation in the Middle East. The US wants to satisfy Israel's needs in the Middle East. I don't know why American leaders don't want to leave Iran alone and what their problem is.
Just some of the viewer comments there. Richard Becker, let's talk about this executive order that Donald Trump signed off on, which got stalled, and that has to deal with the entrance of nationals from 7 Muslim-majority countries. Now, the damage coming from this in the Middle East, in terms of the general viewpoint that Muslims have in this part of the world, don't you think that that breeds hatred towards the U.S., makes people who are already disillusioned by what the U.S. should be, this executive ban adding to that, and having people really go against the notion of what the U.S. stands for? I mean, based on what we're seeing right now, there's a backlash on it, even more so in European countries like the UK and, of course, in the United States.
Well, how could it not? How could it fail to create more animosity toward the United States and toward the United States government? You know, the action taken by the Trump administration and putting this into effect, I mean, the largest number of people who are being affected by it are Iranian. There's absolutely no evidence of any Iranian action against the United States. And I have to say, you know, the U.S. actions against Iran go back and are really not dependent on Israel or for the benefit of Israel as its prime motivation. In 1953, the U.S. and the British overthrew the government of Iran. Israel was an infant state at that time and it was not influencing U.S. policy. The U.S. and British did that in order not only to regain control over the vast oil resources of Iran, but also to, as a lesson to others in the world And the New York Times openly talked about it at that time, that this was to show that resource nationalism by countries emerging from colonialism this is what their fate would be. The government would be overthrown and a police state government would be put into effect. So there's a very long history, and the U.S. motivation is really based on wanting to weaken all of the other countries in the Middle East. This they share with the government of Israel. And so we've seen the states, the stronger states being dismantled one after another. And Iran remains, I think, and I say this in regard to one of the emails, what motivates the United States? Well, there's oil, but I think more importantly, it's that Iran is the stable country, it's a large country, and it's a country that has not been subjected to dismantling or the kind of fate that Iraq and Syria and Libya have suffered, and Yemen as well.
We have to talk about the JCPOA, Alison Weir, this nuclear agreement that was signed off. And we've obviously heard what Trump has to say about it, along with some of his officials in his administration. And by all looks of it, there's going to be a push to try to renegotiate it. Maybe we've had, for example, Paul Ryan just days ago say that, you know, we have to deal with this nuclear agreement. Do you think that the Trump administration is going to finally look at it that it's here to stay and build on that, whatever direction they want to go, or are they going to really try to renegotiate it, which at this point, obviously, Iran has said no, and even Europe, the EU in particular, has come out and said it's not up for renegotiation.
I think despite Trump's previous election campaigning statements, I think indications are now that he actually is going to accept it and build from that. That looks like the latest analysis about him. Regarding his executive order against Muslim countries, 7 of them, what's interesting to look at, and I've just written an article about this, I hope people might read, the fact is that 6 of those 7, every one of those countries was already targeted by Barack Obama in 2015, and more significantly, they were targeted by a plan to take them down in 2001. They had also been targeted by a paper in 1996 and by some other concept papers before that. So it's important to understand the roots of all of this, what's causing it, and what's causing it today. It's very clear that this approach by Trump is not new. The way he's stating it is a little bit more blatant, but it's an outgrowth of policies that were put in place many years ago and that Obama carried out, George Bush carried out, and others also did the same.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much, and we thank our guests from the Answer Coalition. Richard Becker spoke to us from San Francisco, and Alison Weir was just talking there from Berkeley, Executive Director of If Americans Knew. That does it for this edition of The Debate. From me, Kaveh Tavway, and the entire team of the Capital Tehran. It's goodbye.